know, I am big on us getting our authentic voices out there and being our authentic selves and learning skills and how to express our authentic voices internally. Haven't done some interviews in a while, but what inspired me to kickstart this back again was I saw an interview, a friend of mine posted an interview by a wonderful guy called Ayim, and I hope I've pronounced that right. Have I pronounced your name right?
Yeah, no, it's great pronunciation.
Fabulous. She sent me this really amazing post. It just got me so excited. I was like, right, back on there, Ingrid, back on the authenticity lark and gets back to being ourselves. So I grabbed Andy and just like, Andy, can I grab 10 minutes of your time? Which he's kind of agreed to. Andy, hello, my love. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Good morning to you too.
Good morning, my lovely. Andy, tell everyone what you do.
Sure. So I'm a product manager, and I've kind of had a blessed life in that I've traveled to about 40 countries in the last 5 years for work and leisure. So I've worked extensively across South Africa, Kenya, Namibia, Botswana, and I spent about a year or just under a year in Silicon Valley and San Francisco. So as a product manager, it's really important to kind of really develop empathy with your customer and a diversity of thought. So above and beyond kind of the job role, a diversity of thought became an itch that I want to scratch further. So I started blogging a lot and speaking at conferences a lot around like diversity and inclusion, and you know, the importance of not just looking at hiring, but understanding actually how you nurture an environment where someone feels like they can bring themselves to work and be 100% themselves. And that's why I love that interview that you referenced at the beginning, where you know, Juliet, our good friend at Any Good, talks about how she prioritized, you know, authenticity over being accepted. And I felt like that was such a prominent comment. And in essence, that's what I guess the both of us even share and why we're having this conversation today.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I only met Juliet the other day, and I will mention for the point of this interview that she's a white lady. And we just gelled immediately. We were both exhibiting at an event. And then she sent me Andy's interview. And what I love about people who are able to walk their authentic self, they really are able to start sort of like looking beyond colour, race, that kind of thing, and really just connect on a almost like a spiritual level. So
of course,
I'm going to send this to Juliet immediately afterwards, and thank her so much for putting me in touch with you. But yeah, you're totally right. She pointed out that in the end, she decided to put her authentic self first and foremost over and above everything else. Why do people find that so difficult, do you think, Andy?
Well, I think if you look at the social economic background that a lot of, you know, especially people of color here in the UK and in London come from, you know, like my parents were immigrants and they came from Ghana in hope of new opportunity and a new life and a better opportunity for their children here in England. And, you know, for us, it was almost like just get to that milestone of really doing well in school and getting prestigious jobs. We've all heard it before, you know, have you become a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant? Yeah. It's the same for each of our parents. And I guess for them, it was almost like they just want you to have a better life than they knew. The thing that was the gap that we didn't notice when we were growing up is that there wasn't that awareness or accessibility. So what that means is that we didn't have a father or uncle or a friend who worked in the city at Goldman Sachs or who could tell us about careers in tech. And therefore, we were learning by doing. And therefore, when we first got into our jobs, especially after university, we did want to be accepted. We did want to adapt. But it gets to a point where you adapt to a point where you feel like you're breaking. And you realize that actually in certain work environments, especially here in London, and I notice it's a lot working within tech, is that the environment is more of a meritocracy than a meritocracy.
Can you explain
yeah,
that?
Sure. So people end up hiring people based on things such as the pub test. You know, could I go for a drink with this person? Is this someone that I could talk to about rugby and about my interests? And they end up trying to hire people like them instead of bringing people with a diversity of thought and different perspectives, which actually lowers risk and actually allows you to actually broaden your customer base because you have people that have empathy with a different cultural background of customers than you do yourself. So what we end up happening is people are hiring based on who is someone that they get along with as a friend first, then what growth potential do they have, and then actually what their skill set is. But I think we need to do this in reverse and think about actually what are the values of this person? Does it fit with the values of this organization? Secondly, what growth potential do they have? And thirdly, the skills, because to be honest, a lot of us can be taught the skills that are needed to do the day-to-day job.
Interesting. So that's a great point there. You mentioned about culture fit and certainly related to it from a matter of race. I'll get that from women too, of all races. That
of course.
This is very much an issue. This culture fit is first and foremost. So it's interesting you're talking about how it impacted you from a race perspective, found that you had to assimilate. But this is what I'm hearing day in, day out across the board, not just from race, but from gender also, that people are feeling, in fact, HR directing them to assimilate. Now, people like me and you were big on diversity of thought, but we're talking about a major culture shift. People have that ingrained in them that you have to assimilate to get on. And when I have this conversation, it's almost like, dumb sunk, we can't. And they feel it's not happening. They've now realized diversity of thought is the way forward. But how they realistically, these are really great words, in your view, how would they realistically change this culture from assimilating to actually rocking who you are?
I'll tell you what, it's really hard at the bigger companies because, there's an African proverb that says, once clay has been molded and is set, you chip away at it to mold it, but it's more difficult. But once it's wet, it's easy to mold it. Right. So once a company's already set in its ways and has already grown to a significant scale, what usually has happened in the past is that company's tried to keep the culture that it had when they were a small company and maintain that until they grew. When actually that's not really scalable. And if we think of the examples such as celebrating someone's birthday, when you're a 10-man company and a 10-woman company, it's very easy to do that. It's my birthday on a Tuesday, everyone brings in a cake, has a card, sings happy birthday. But once you have 600 employees, you're going to be getting bothered nearly every other day because there's always going to be someone's birthday. So that's an example of one of many things that's just not scalable from a cultural perspective. So actually, I don't look for cultural fit, but I look for cultural evolution. How can someone actually add to the culture and enrich the culture and take the culture forward? And I love to reference even what we see, for example, in the music sphere in the US, where we have people such as Nas, who was a rapper from New York, who's then gone on to become an investor and start a VC firm called Queensbridge Venture Capital, investing in the likes of Dropbox and big companies such as Genius and Casper. And this is someone who was a rapper from New York, but that's cultural add. He's bringing a different perspective and he's adding to that culture and that narrative where actually his business prowess now transcends even music. I feel like here in the UK, when we look at our startups, that key period is in that first 10 hires. Because in that period of time is where you really get the opportunity to mold and shape what that culture becomes and what the values are going forward for that company.
So I think that, are we saying it's a lost cause then, once that culture's already fit, they've already got 600 stuff? Because I've seen it before where there are gender or race issues or a number of diversity issues. They've hired a massive bigwig to go into these organisations, into these tech organisations, but it is so solid they can't shift it. Now I hear that marvelous example of some of the music industry is a big name, but say little old me going into a little old you going to a big old organisation, I just see it, they end up leaving because it is so, like you said, from that wonderful proverb, which I loved, by the way, you just can't, and I don't like the word can't, I always say can't yet, but just to be devil's advocate, you just are unable to shift it.
I think the truth of the matter is that, once you're in a big corporation, it's a systemic problem, and it's actually wider than even that company itself. And this is why I wouldn't call it a lost cause and it can never be fixed, but it's not a problem that I personally am passionate about fixing because it's such a long-winded process to undo all of what's been done so far. So the reason I call it a systemic problem is because a lot of these companies are driven by quarterly profits. And this is what drives their shareholder value. So, a publicly listed company like Vodafone, for example, is incentivized to look at those tax loopholes and cut their costs. They're incentivized to keep reporting growth on their profit and their revenue figures. That is regardless of what their diversity looks like. So this is why we're getting all of these tech reports from Facebook, Google, Uber, Lyft, of how they're really failing at diversity, but their shareholders do not really care because all they care about is whether those numbers in terms of revenue and quarterly profit is being reached. And that's why we need to prove and bring that business case forward where we're saying, actually, diversity helps to add to that. We can help you become more profitable. We can generate more revenue, and we need to share more of those stories in order to really make a difference to the bottom line of these companies, because you have to think about what their incentive structure is and what they really care about.
Absolutely. That's always been my thing. Why should they care? I have these arguments and these talks, conversations with people all the time. They're asking that question, well, why should we care? However, I also do, as you probably aware, a lot of talks on unconscious bias and how much this is just entrenched in our minds, how we just live by these labels. And it's, you know, it's very difficult to shift. I've just started a new mindfulness approach to shift it, which works. But on a general scale, it's very much entrenched. So we're talking about these guys who are making, or when I say guys, I mean men and women, what have you, making phenomenal amounts of money. Yes, they can get a competitive edge by having a more diverse workforce. However, unconscious bias is a very uncomfortable subject. It makes people feel incredibly uncomfortable. The world is moving faster and faster and faster, which makes unconscious biases thrive in our minds. My concern is with these labels, rigid in people's minds once again, and they want to do better, but it makes them feel bad. I mean, how do you see a difference happening, bearing in mind these biases are just entrenched and in fact getting worse, being perpetuated even?
I think there's two small things that can make a major difference in companies today, and one is in looking at the character traits of the person that you're hiring. And at its core, you need them to have 3 character traits which are really important. One is a sense of curiosity, someone that's really willing to feed their curiosity. Secondly, is that kind of like mentality and philosophy of continuous learning, someone that actually wants to continue to grow and continue to learn. And thirdly is a sense of empathy, someone that's willing to actually step inside someone else's shoes to understand their cultural context and their social economic background. And where we really are missing a trick is when someone new joins an organization, we always have all of these like induction sessions, or induction week, but we never really bring to bear these kind of conversations up front. And we should, because that probation period should be a period where actually a company is assessing whether that person's the right fit for them, but also that person should personally be feeling like, is this the right fit for me? And there's certain conversations during that first kind of induction week or induction period where we should be having around, having conversations like, do you feel comfortable going home at night after an event? No. Why not? Because actually there's no well-lit streets where I live. So suddenly, by providing those kind of contexts, we understand that person's perspective and we can step into their shoes, And there's a lot of like big differences that people are just unconscious of, such as, growing up, I never read about characters that I could identify with books that I read. Even Harry Potter, I couldn't identify characters in, And it's important to understand this because, when you look at relevant role models, they do make a difference. Because when you see someone that you can relate to, that you feel has come from a similar area to you or similar background, you just feel like I can do it too. And it creates that awareness that I was talking about and that accessibility. And I was talking yesterday at a launch event for something called Afro Tech Fest, which is happening in January. And we're talking about how inaccessible it is when there's a conference that costs, for example, £500 or conference out in Silicon Valley. I can't access that. I just can't afford to, and I can't afford to even travel to Silicon Valley. So how do we make it more accessible and consumable by this audience that is desperate actually to really break into tech and break into these companies and make a difference? And generally actually can, if given the opportunity to do so.
Indeed. One thing I love and admire about you is that, like I said, I do lots of talks about bias, but I'm not sure if you've heard the word stereotype threat. And what that means, stereotype threat. So it's when you, so I will get nervous sometimes when I want to raise a black issue. And I would always slip under a gender issue because what I don't want to evoke is people saying, "Oh, well, it's just a personal thing. This is just a personal issue for you."
Right.
So what might happen, for example, a woman might be in a meeting. She might be afraid to cry because she's thinking, "Oh, they're going to think it's because
I'll be judged."
Like, just feels like crying. But you really, talk about the black issues, race issues, really quite comfortably, I feel. Was that always the case, or did you?
No, it definitely wasn't. It definitely wasn't. But like what I touched on before, maybe I was prioritizing a little bit too much on acceptance rather than authenticity. But what was kind of pivotal in my experience was kind of experiencing a lot of the black culture out in the US. So spending that time in Silicon Valley and San Francisco and just seeing how unapologetically black they were over there, I realized how conservative a system we're living in here in the UK, where we feel awful and we feel awkward and we feel bad to discuss things that are really pressing and really matter to us. But the truth of the matter is, until we can speak up against it, we're never going to really make a difference. So I just picked up the baton and said to myself, like, I need to be one of many people who are willing to start having these conversations and intellectually have these conversations with senior leaders to actually see how we can move things forward. You know, and it helps when you're a practitioner yourself as well. So, you know, I've been a product manager for a number of years. Before that, I was a management consultant. But I've worked alongside, you know, middle-class white boys and girls from Cambridge, Oxford, and I've performed as well as them, if not outperformed them. So that built that confidence in my ability and kind of like allowed me to really come to the table. But the key thing is coming to a table and making sure that your voice is being acted on and heard. And that's the inclusion part. And that's the part where a lot of companies are missing the trick. They're always almost like inviting you to come to the table, but actually your voice is not really being acted on. So are you really being heard?
Indeed. And something I want to touch on there, and it's kind of two questions merged into one. I'm really excited about the millennials because I found that I've been, you know, probably twice your age and twice my audience's age. And when I went out there and I was doing my talks, I realised, I mean, I've been feeling this way for many, many years, but I realised that my audience was quite young. It was the millennials. And I do feel that they see diversity. In fact, they're the ones who are really embracing diversity of thought. I really said they see diversity quite different to the old generation. It isn't a tick box affair. They really do want that equality, and they really do appreciate these different voices at the table.
For sure.
But I have hope that the future can come from millennials, those companies who are you know, bow down to stakeholders that would better keep it the same. They're almost going to be left behind very, very soon. Now, I have hope there. Do you think I'm being a little bit naive?
No, I think technology has enabled us to really connect with the global's voice, you know, and the global struggle. So now I can actually relate and understand and learn more about the stories in the US or in Panama or in Ghana, because technology is enabling me to do so, you know, and that's where social networks have made a huge difference, you know. So people reference things such as Black Twitter, but actually that's our voices on Twitter, and that's a way for us to really understand actually from a global perspective, like what things are going on in terms of news that represents our culture, you know. Or if I think about even my parents' generation, like I said, it's the immigrant story. They came here for a better life for their children. And in doing that, they felt they had to sacrifice almost like having passion and purpose behind their career. And therefore, for example, my dad was a minicab driver for 20 years. Our generation is not willing to do that. We're more purposeful, and we feel actually entitled to be purposeful. And therefore, you'll be very, very difficult to find even a millennial that will stay in a job for 10 years, let alone 15 or 20 years.
I know, they're not doing it.
And therefore, employers have to pay attention now, because suddenly employers are thinking, I'm investing so much time, money, and resources into you, and you're leaving after 2 or 3 years. I need to rethink how this employment thing is going to work. And then there's so much more independent location independent entrepreneurs now, you know, so from influencers to, you know, merchants that are selling online on Amazon and Etsy. It has just empowered a new wave of millennials, I feel. So I feel like the landscape is ever changing, and even employers are going to have to think differently around what employment looks like and what employment benefits really look like, rather than the standard old pensions that no one's attracted to anymore, or all of these benefits that are not actually beneficial to me as a millennial, as I think about my longevity of my career, rather than just my loyalty to the next 2-3 years at this job.
You know, I swear I was born 25 years too because I always felt that about pensions. Like, why am I staying in a job that I hate so badly? You know, for when I'm 60 and I'm like 20. Do you know what I mean? So one final question. The other thing I picked up from your blog post and reading your material, which touched me and really made me so excited, was that you use a term called authentic inclusion, and where you authentically are actually mixing with people from, you know, who are different to you, who look differently to you, and what have you. And I felt emotional when I read that, because when I go back to myself and going back when I was younger, in fact, a very dear friend who's a very high CEO of Hitachi, who's much older than me, and I remember him saying to me, teaching me from a very young age, Ingrid, you never know where your next message is coming from. Before then, in a weird way, I've never defined myself by my colour or my gender. I just saw myself as Ingrid. So I always mixed with people, not just from my own race and gender, but who were different to me, because I always knew that we'll only know so much, and you know so much more in your area, you know that in your area. So I always mixed inclusively, authentically, not, I didn't just do it because, that's a good business thing to do. It's a way it was just the way I was. It just so happened that the person was white, was Indian, was a male, and what have you. And equally, I do that with my son. I encourage him now to mix of different worlds, because I want him to mix in different worlds for different perspectives. But he wants to get to the school where we're quite lucky, where they do mix with each other based on how hard they work, what they want to achieve, as opposed to the colour of their skin. So, I mean, equally, I live in an area, I live near Brixton, where, unless it changes,
very multicultural.
Very multicultural. I've always felt this was the most diverse place to live, where people were just like Brixtonians and they didn't really give a hoot what colour you were. That was secondary. Equally, I still meet people now who will say to me, oh my gosh, you're the first black friend I've had.
Wow.
Or I might have a black person say to me, oh, you laugh with white people the same. I'm like, oh, what she said was funny. So can you see, just from your world and where you live, is that going to get any better, that we will mix authentically, not because diversity of thought is the right thing to do, but because actually you're just darn interesting?
Yeah, I think we definitely will. I think where things have broken down is that, you get into organizations, and I posted something on, Apple's VP of inclusion and diversity recently, and her audacious comments at this recent conference, which I'm not gonna mention again. But where we've gone wrong is that we have all of these diversity inclusion officers, and we're not yet discussing the fact that it's a problem that we even have that as a position in the first place, because that is the responsibility of the whole company and everyone who adheres to the values of the company, and we shouldn't need it as a role. Which is why in primary school, we authentically are included and don't even have diversity inclusion officers, because we don't care whether, Garsam's from Pakistan or Stephen's an atheist or, like Laura's from Jamaica. It doesn't matter. We're friends and we have shared interests. Indeed. And we need to maintain that. It gets broken out of school after the school process when we start getting into these social circles where we're talking to only those that we can relate to, or, we're going to a workplace that only has a big majority of people who have shared interests, and anyone else that doesn't fit into that suddenly feels excluded in that process. So I think we need to think back to almost like when we were kids, and how we can continue to nurture that kind of environment and that kind of mentality and philosophy, because it's sad that, I can go backpacking in South America for 3 months and hardly see another black person. And when I see a South American kid, he's saying, hey, Will I am, because that's the only black reference that he has to mind, Or you go to your skiing trip and, a white person's asking you whether you prefer to be on the beach because it's such a foreign concept for them, But the good thing is, the more that they see us backpacking, the more that they see us on these skiing trips, the more it becomes the norm. And it breaks down those ignorances, it breaks down all those biases that you mentioned before. So I feel like we all have a part to play, and we're each chipping away in our own individual ways, but collectively as a community too.
Oh, and you touched my heart, Andy. And, and then fun enough, I met with a friend yesterday, and I said to her that, there's a white friend I met for lunch, and I said to her that sometimes what makes me sad is that once we do slow down our thinking and do just pause and remove those layers, those labels, when you break it down, we all actually have the same hopes, fears, dreams, anxieties, wants, and underneath it all, we are just people. So yeah, I'm going to wrap up on that note.
No, of course, we're all part of one race, the human race. Like, we need to be honest with that.
For real. Andy, for anyone who wants to get in contact with you, can you give us some, web addresses and all the rest?
Sure. So I'm available at andyayim.com. I'm not sure if we just put in.
Andy?
Sorry?
Spell that for us, please. I know A-N-D-Y, Andy.
Yep, and it's A-Y-I-M for mother. Yep. So it's andyayim.com. You can also reach me if you want to email me at hello@andyayim.com. And like on my website, it's all my links to my Twitter, my Medium. You can read a lot of my posts there that Ingrid was mentioning kindly. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to always have this discussion.
Wicked. You're awesome, Andy.
No, likewise. Thank you for having me on the show.
No worries.